The president wants to spy on 200 million Americans without a warrant. Has he read this document, which he was sworn to uphold?
Now, I will not have you libel Abraham Lincoln.
I don't understand the problem with registering guns. We register cars.
Mark Levine brings you the news the government doesn't want you to know.
Today, an explosive story about connections between white supremacists and Islamic terrorists.
When there's a conflict between Scalia's conservative values and the Constitution of the United States, he throws away the Constitution.
When we do have secret prisons, that is not what America's all about.
Let's go to Mark in 5, 4, 3, 2.
The president wants to... Good evening, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine, and my guest today is Terry D. Kester. He's a progressive commentator with me on WPFW. We do the Raucous Caucus every Tuesday night on 89.3 FM. I urge you to check us out at 7 o'clock p.m. Terry is the self-proclaimed doctor of democracy. Welcome, Terry, to the Inside Scoop.
It's nice to be with you, Mark. Thank you very much.
I want to talk tonight about class warfare. Now, we have a number of people who are occupying Wall Street, young people. They've gotten a little bit of attention when the police shot some pepper spray at some of them. But by the way, it's not just Wall Street. It's going on in several cities across the nation, in Boston, Rhode Island, California. The movement is growing. And the question is, what are people protesting? Republicans will tell you that President Obama and the Democrats have begun class warfare. They will tell you that rich people are a persecuted class, that millionaires and billionaires suffer when President Obama and the Democrats insist that they pay the same rates as middle class and poor people. I want to explore today whether the super wealthy should be the ones who control most of the nation's purse strings, or whether or not maybe it's the middle class's turn. I suspect I know which position Terry Kester has. Terry, welcome again.
Thank you.
So one of the big things that came up recently is when a billionaire, Warren Buffett, and again, I don't mean to attack all billionaires. A lot of people come in and they say, Democrats hate billionaires. No, I like Warren Buffett a lot, actually. I don't agree with everything he says.
He's one of the
best.
best.
But one of the things he said was that we billionaires pay too little taxes. He complained about the fact that we have people that are struggling to get by, and his secretary and his janitor both pay higher tax rates than he does. And now Warren Buffett is the Republicans' least liked billionaire. I want to ask you what your thoughts were on Warren Buffett and whether or not you think there's a real chance to tax millionaires and billionaires at least the way middle-class people are taxed.
Well, I would hope so, Mark. I mean, I actually have a lot of respect for Warren Buffett. I mean, he's one of the few super wealthy people that accepts the fact that he's super wealthy and doesn't try to hide it. He actually lives relatively modestly. As you know, he lives in, Omaha, I think, and he still lives in his original house and everything else. He's not extravagant. He also has a great deal of wit. I hate to confess this in the midst of this class warfare, but I have a couple of shares of baby Berkshire. Those real cheap
That's
Berkshire.
Okay. It's okay.
So I get the company report, and it's the only company report you'll ever get where the CEO actually has a sense of humor and a self-deprecating sense of humor. I have a lot of respect for Warren Buffett, and he has been, I believe, teamed up with Gates, on this idea that the wealthy people simply have to do more all the way around.
Well, I think one of the things that we need to do is to go sort of tax by tax, because if you turn on Fox News, if you turn on a conservative network, you will hear people say, hey, the rich bear half the income taxes are not paid by anyone at all, and that the rich pay whatever the figure is. The top 1% pay 40% of the nation's income tax, or whatever it is. I think it's actually less. I think it's like 30-something percent. And they always talk about the income tax. That's the only tax they want to talk about. And some conservative commentators actually take that and they say, the middle class pay no taxes. Well, maybe these commentators have never been middle class, but maybe they don't know that when you go to, maybe they have servants buy things for them. They don't know that when you go to a grocery, you pay a sales tax. They don't know that when you get a paycheck, you pay FICA, you pay a 7.5% tax. They don't know that middle class people pay gas tax and so forth. For them, the bottom line is only the income tax. And when it comes to Warren Buffett, the reason why he pays less than his secretary or his janitor is because of the capital gains tax.
Right.
And there was an interesting article in the Washington Post recently that said that 50% of all capital gains taxes go to people in the top 0.1% of the American population, people who make more than $1.5 million a year.
Yeah.
Not just own $1 million in assets, but make more than $1.5 million a year.
Yep.
And capital gains is taxed at 15%,
right.
where ordinary income, if you make more than $35,000, is taxed at 28%.
28%, right.
So you have the janitor sweeping the floors, paying double the rate of the guy who sits there and clips dividends. Do you think these facts are well known by the American public?
I don't understand why they aren't well known. I mean, it's amazing to me, and I, for one, am perfectly in favor of the expression class warfare, because I consider it a class warfare. If we are being attacked on every single front economically, and I don't know about you, kid, but I'm being attacked on every front.
I think most of America is, except the billionaires.
Except the billionaires, yeah. And how they cannot know it, I mean, it's a mystery to me, because the facts are perfectly available, and you're absolutely right that the super rich, they're not paying, on income tax. Most of their wealth comes from investments to begin with, so they're only paying the capital gains tax.
And even interest rates and dividends are taxed at a lower rate than ordinary income.
Yeah, exactly. And if they are paying any other taxes, of course, with the super lawyers that they can all afford to hire, and the super accountants and everything else, they get deductions you and I wouldn't even think of, and they manipulate the code. And by manipulation of the code, they're paying an extraordinarily poor percentage of the tax burden.
And, of course, when you're talking about Warren Buffett and you're talking about Bill Gates, one of the first things that comes to mind is the estate tax. Now, this is paid by less than 1 in 200 people who die in America. Basically, you can give some $10 million as a couple to your kids. But when you have more than $10 million, which is a lot of money for most people. Most people don't, 10 million, 20 million. No, it tends to be a lot of money. Then you have to pay some tax on it. What I find is that the richest people, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, have said, you know what, my kids don't need more than $1 billion. I know Bill Gates has said that he's going to give 90% of his wealth away to charity.
And that's because of his father more than even him. His father is the one that really stressed that.
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh, yes, and his father was the head of the foundation. I'm not sure he still is now. But he
Bill and Melissa Gates, I think, his wife.
Yeah, but his father was very, very adamant about that and actually pushed Bill Gates. And I don't know how quickly Bill accepted it, but he did accept that idea that there's no point in passing on this wealth.
And yet, class warfare.
Yes.
Rings a bell. The biggest attack on President Obama in the campaign, lest we forget Joe the plumber, whose name wasn't Joe and wasn't a plumber. And lied about his taxes to Obama. And the guy was entirely fake. But what he did do was he raised the issue of whether or not middle class and poor people should have equal opportunity. President Obama said it's okay to spread the wealth around. And suddenly you heard the pink word, communism, right? If you tax rich people the same as middle class people, oh no, it's a redistribution of wealth, head for the hills, socialism. How much socialism is there in America, and how much is being put forward by Obama?
Well, very little. Well, it depends on who you are. If you happen to be, military and you're on TRICARE, that's about the most socialistic program you can find.
Sure.
What is it, $450 a year? I'm not sure if that's for member or family, but I know it's maximum for member. That's incredible socialistic.
It's interesting. We were trying to give our best to the veterans. Well, we gave them the GI Bill back in the 40s and let them go to college. We give them very, very cheap health care. And conservatives have no problem with socialism for veterans.
Well, so they say.
Well, they won't say it's socialism, but national health care. They want the finest for the veterans, so they give them national health care. But national health care for everyone else is terrible.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how the same program is great for veterans and terrible for the rest of us.
Well, you mentioned the phrase to begin with of in the class welfare context and the distribution of wealth. I hate to break the news to anybody, but the purpose of government is to redistribute wealth. That's what it does.
I invited Karl Marx on my show. I had no idea.
I hate to break it to you, but that's exactly what government does.
Why is that?
Well, because government has certain responsibilities, some in the Constitution, obviously many legislated. And what government does is collect money, revenue, it's called revenue, by taxes, which is their constitutional right, which everybody voted for in the states when the Constitution was ratified. They take that money and they redistribute it. And they are the ones who decide how it is redistributed, except today, of course, as we know, it's the corporations who are deciding how it's redistributed. But that's what government does. That's what government is for. It provides services.
Now, Terry, you know there are people in the Tea Party that are going to say that's not in the Constitution. So just for any of you who are in the Tea Party, who happen to have your copy of the Constitution out, I want you to read with me Article 1, Section 8. Good. Because it's not one that's read that often, at least not by people in the Tea Party. It says, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts, and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Yep. The general welfare.
The welfare.
You can collect taxes to pay for the general welfare. Oh,
yeah.
My God, the Founding Fathers were Marxists.
Apparently so. They were way ahead of Karl.
Wow.
You know.
So that you can actually lay and collect taxes to make the general welfare of the United States.
That's what government does. That is the purpose of government. You need a larger institution to provide larger services, be it defense or health care or whatever it is in your local community, fire department, police, schools. They take in revenue from you, yes, the citizen, and therefore you get services. You know, that's what government is.
There are some on the right. When I think of the right wing in America, the Republican Party, I think of really three groups. There's sort of the business conservatives. There's the Tea Party populist libertarian branch, and then there's the religious branch, the Christian conservative branch. And I would say the religious branch that they need to open up their Bible, because if they think that that this is socialist, they need to check what's in both the Old and New Testaments. I mean, it wasn't just in the New Testament where Jesus said it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than a rich man to enter heaven. But in the Old Testament, there's something called the Jubilee year, where every 50 years, everybody gives up all their assets, they mix them up equally and start over again, which is about as pure a socialist idea as I've ever heard anywhere, including by Karl Marx.
And wasn't there a thing in the Old Testament about in the Jewish tribes in the beginning that every 7 years you forgave debt?
That's right. Every 7 years debt
you forgave. Imagine Bank of America doing this?
And you left a corner of your field fallow so that the poor could come and eat. Now, again, people can reject this if they want. Obviously, you have the right to any religion you want. But what strikes me is that the people on the right claim to be very Christian. They claim to respect the Bible. They claim to respect religion. They claim to respect the Constitution. And yet we found that, well, the Bible, Old and New Testaments, and religion, both, and the Constitution, both seem to support the idea that there has to be some redistribution of wealth. But how much is too much? Maybe we've gone too far. How much redistribution of wealth should be there? We're going to talk about that and take your calls if you like. Join in the discussion. You can agree with one of us or disagree with both of us. 888-488-MARK.
Get hit by their boyfriends and husbands. Too many women are pressured into having unprotected sex. Half of the people in the world living with AIDS are women. It doesn't have to be this way. Together, we can change this reality. Let's strive for a world free of violence.
At Volunteers of America, we don't just give kids a way to stay off the streets. We give them the tools they need to reach their full potential. We don't just help the elderly receive needed care. We help them live life to the fullest. We don't just provide food for homeless individuals and families. We provide job training and placement so they can buy groceries. Volunteers of America is a national organization that for over 100 years has provided programs and services that allow people to overcome their challenges to become vital members of their community. At Volunteers of America, we don't just help people, we help people help themselves. Find out how you can support the programs that are working in your community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
Drivers face all kinds of distractions.
Guys, stop playing. No. 127 consecutive.
Before your wireless phone becomes one of them, stop. Drive safely. Keep your phone in easy reach and dial sensibly. In bad weather or traffic, call later. and use a hands-free device. Remember,
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. My guest today is Terry D. Kester. He's a progressive commentator who shares the microphone with me on WPFW 89.3 FM. We are the Raucous Caucus, along with Garland Nixon, every Tuesday at 7 p.m. I hope you'll listen in. We're talking today about class warfare because, after all, that's what the Republicans are accusing the Democrats of, accusing President Obama of. And, Terry, you accept the term. You don't mind that
No.
moniker because they mean it pejoratively.
In fact, when you invited me on the show and said it was going to be about class welfare,
Class warfare.
Warfare, yes, right, class warfare. My assumption was that you wanted us to announce that the war was over, that we'd lost. And, that there's no point.
Do we surrender?
Yeah, we surrendered, and we let them have everything they wanted, and the class warfare has ended. But,
Wait, you say we've lost. Let's actually look at some statistics here. We got them on the screen. This is from Mother Jones. It's very good. This shows the average income per family in America. So the top 0.01% makes $27 million a year. That's the top 100th of a percent. The top 10th of a percent makes $3 million a year. The top 1% makes more than $1 million a year. The top 10% makes about $164,000 a year, and the bottom 90%, all of them put together, makes about $31,000 a year. Now that's a lot. Excuse me. I want to make sure this. I got to get the graph right here. What this graph is the amount that has grown, the amount of economic growth in the past 30 years. So since 1980. The top 100th of a percent has made 27 million more. The top 10th of a percent, 3 million more. Top 1%, 1 million more. The bottom 90% in 30 years has made 31,000 more. Now that's 9 out of 10 Americans have made about $1,000 a year in the last 30 years, whereas the top 100th of a percent has made an additional $1 million a year. Let me show you a few more statistics. We can get them up on the screen here. The richest 10% controls 2/3 of America's net worth. By the way, this is 2007 data. I can tell you that it's old. The top 1% used to only have 1/3 of the nation's wealth. It's now 40%. The top 10%, according to this, that's closer to being right. It's about 75% of the entire nation's wealth. The bottom 90% has about 25%. Again, it's actually increased since 2007. This graph shows in the last 30 years how Americans' incomes have increased. The red line that's going way up,
let me guess.
That's the top 1%. And their incomes have more than doubled since 1979, up there at about 120%. You can see that on the right. The red line is the only one that seems to be doing a lot of movement. The bright yellow line is the top 1/5 of Americans, top 20%. It has gone up slightly. Good for them. Not near like the top 1%. If you look at the other three lines, the ones that are hugging the base there's almost no room to see them. That would be the other 80% of us. And if you look at the share in income, which is the graph on the right, it's gone down. 80% of us are poorer than we were in just 30 years. And lastly, one more graph, the actual distribution of wealth in America. The top 20% have more than 85% of the nation's wealth. The next 20% has another good 10%. If you look at those tiny little light blue and dark blue, that's the bottom 40%. It's somewhere less than 1%. Interestingly, Americans think that the richest 20% have about 60% of the nation's wealth. It said they have more than 80%. And what they'd like it to be is they'd like the richest 20% to have about 30%. So this is what Americans say when you poll them. They think the richest 20% should have 30%, and the poorest 20% should have about 10%. Of course, as we've noticed, the bottom 40% is about 1%. Lastly, the median net worth of American families is about $120,000, with 1 in 22 being a millionaire. For members of Congress, half of them are millionaires. And of the 10 richest ones, interestingly, 100% voted to extend the Bush tax cuts.
Surprise.
A few more statistics for you. Wall Street profits in the last 2007-2009 are up 720%. Employment rate up 102%. In that same time period, American homes lost a third of their value. So while American homes are losing 1/3, Wall Street has made 7 times the profits that they made. This also shows CEO pay versus average worker pay. CEOs make 185 times what the average worker makes. By the way, that's much more than anywhere else around the world, Japan. I mean, other than some really poor countries like Mexico and so forth. But any industrialized nation, we are the worst. And also, lastly, a millionaire's tax rate. As you can see, it was as high as 66% and is now gotten lower and lower. And as you can also see, the individual, the payroll tax, that's that FICA that goes to middle-class people, that's gone way up as a percentage of what the government takes in. Corporate tax is down. Individual income tax has stayed about the same, although, as you mentioned, the poor pay more. The statistics go on and on and on. So Terry, you say it is a war and we lost.
It's a war. I mean, for some reason or other, because we have supposedly a democracy, a democratic republic, people think that there's actually been some kind of change in human nature. Now, I have bad news for them again.
What do you mean by a change in human nature?
It's only been, people don't even really understand this, but it's only been a couple of hundred years before this whole world has moved away from slavery. Up until the late 1700s, 3/4 of the world's population was enslaved. It's a short time that we've actually moved away from that. We didn't move away from it because a lot of very rich people decided, heck, I don't want slavery anymore. That's not really what happened.
Slavery was very profitable for the slave owner.
You're darn right it's profitable. And, the same impulse amongst human beings to acquire more, to be greedy, the same flaws that have always been there have not gone away just because a couple hundred years ago we happened to get a little bit of a democratic republic that had a little bit of enlightenment, trying to give us a little bit of balance. All of the tendencies are there, and they will always be there with human. And what the rich are really going for is the most isolated aristocracy you can possibly imagine, and they are achieving it. You and I do not know where they live. You and I do not know where they socialize.
They're all around us.
They're not around us.
No, I guess
they're off
not.
on Bahamas or Dubai or whatever. They have their own separate world that they live in that has nothing to do with you and me. That's why the class war is much more than just economic. I just heard a wonderful, wonderful speech that Richard Trumka gave at the Brookings Institution, and boy, should people...
The head of the AFL-CIO.
President of the AFL-CIO. Boy, people should really pay attention to Mr. Trumka. But he pointed out that in the last decade, America has lost 5.5 million manufacturing jobs. Now, that is not by accident. That is not that something just happened because we got lazy or because a few policies were a little misguided. That is a deliberate course of action achieved by corporations controlled by very wealthy people doing what corporations do, doing what the rich people do, which is go for the lowest labor they can get.
And that's why I think we can actually combine both of what you're saying, both the slavery that existed 150 years ago in America and the fact that manufacturing jobs are down. Really, there's a simple reason. See, slavery could be not the best option for a slave owner. You see, you got to feed the slaves. You might mistreat them, you might beat them, you might kill a few of them, might have sex with a few of them. But at the end of the day, you got to house them, you got to feed them.
It's tough.
China, India, and Mexico, and the American corporations that are in those 3 countries and other poor countries on earth, have found that you can actually get better than slavery. See, what you do is the people come and work for you at practically nothing, $1 a day.
You're talking about Texas.
Texas would be one of those.
Yes, right.
India, Mexico, China, and Texas, right?
Right.
Where they come, they work for $1 a day, but you don't have to feed them. You don't have to house them. You don't have to provide for their health care. All of that's being cut by the wayside. They live under a bridge and maybe have to steal to make a living or grab some from other family or friends. And then you can actually, as a slave owner, do better than slavery. Because under slavery, you got lots of work, but the cost of actually feeding them and health care and shelter might be greater than the wages they're paying in China, India, Mexico, and Texas. So actually, when you look at our loss of manufacturing jobs to China, India, Mexico, or in the United States to places like Texas, over Massachusetts and Michigan and in Washington State like that, you can see they're going for the lower labor rates, and actually what they're doing is they're doing one better than slavery. How do you like that?
Well, it's a fact. I mean, and I did a lot of work for Colonial Williamsburg and for Mount Vernon, doing historical research and scripting for them. And one of the things that I discovered while working in Williamsburg working at Mount Vernon for the George Washington estate, is the fact that George Washington's slaves were economically better off than a minimum wage worker today.
Wow.
And
in terms of real wages.
Yeah, exactly because of what you said, because they did have housing. It wasn't the great housing, but some of it was okay. You know, they had food, they had, even medical care back then, at least in the George Washington estate, not all slave owners. But the slave owner at Mount Vernon, the slaves at Mount Vernon were better off economically than a minimum wage paid worker today in America.
Now, the Republicans say, Rick Perry is very proud of what he's done in Texas. Yeah. And he says, we can outcompete Mexico, India, and China. We can treat our American workers worse than they do in China. In China, they don't have sewage. Yeah. In India, they don't have homes, And in Mexico, they're having trouble finding a place to eat. If we just deny our own workers food and health care and shelter and sanitary facilities, we can harm American labor so much that they are indeed worse than the slaves, and then the businesses will make a ton of profits, and that's why I've created so many jobs in Texas.
Well, he's
very proud of that.
The term that should be used to Mr. Perry is always, you have your workers in wage slavery, and he really does. That's what Texas is. They have the lowest paid. I think Mississippi is the only state that pays its workers less.
Texas and Mississippi are tied.
Rick's making progress.
For the highest percentage of minimum wage and below minimum wage workers in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, and it's criminal.
That's how they compete.
Yeah, this is what I mean about this. Class war is much bigger than just dollars and cents. I mean, it really is a social philosophy by the super rich. And they won't say it out loud. It's not true of everyone. It's not true of Warren Buffett. It's not true of Bill Gates. But essentially, you, me, the worker, we are disposable people. We are simply people who do not matter in their scheme of things. And they will use us, to be sure, for labor at the lowest possible rate with the lowest possible power. And that's the other part of the class warfare that we really have to think about. The money that they have, the money that the super rich use, and the influence that they buy is destroyed, in my opinion, our democracy entirely.
I'll tell you what, I want to recommend a book if you haven't read it. Many of you, at least I read it in high school. It's a book by Upton Sinclair called The Jungle.
Yes.
And it describes working conditions in the 1890s in America. And I would say to you, the Republican candidates for president want to return us to those wonderful days of the 1890s when workers really were disposable. But my question is, would that lead workers to rise up as they did in the 19-teens? We'll be right back with that. Right after this.
Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
The Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Back to the Inside Scoop. I am your host, Mark Levine. My guest today is Terry D. Kester. He's a progressive commentator with me on WPFW 89.3 FM. Terry and I and Garland Nixon together form the Raucous Caucus. We're pretty raucous. You should check us out every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, 7 to 8 p.m. And take a listen to what we have to say. If you don't agree with Terry and me, it is fine. It is good. We want to hear from you. Whether you agree or not, just pick up the phone and dial toll-free 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. You can also try locally 571-749-1166. And tell us off if you want. It's perfectly fine with us. Now, Terry, there's a lot of people, and I don't know if we can show this clip from Fox News. Can we show this clip here? Can we get the volume on this? Oh, I don't know if we can get that. All right, I don't know if we can get that. But Fox News and other things will say, you know, this is aggressive. It's eat the rich. And it shows on the Bill O'Reilly show, it shows that Democrats hate rich people. And Loringham talks about the poor rich people and how they're being abused. And the argument goes something like this, and I've heard them say it. Well, rich people are the job creators, and they pull the trains, and that you either got to be pulling the train or you got to be sitting in the train. And there's this idea that rich people are hardworking and all the poor are lazy. That if you sit there and you inherit millions of dollars doing nothing, you're working hard. If you sit there and your investments make money, you're working hard. But if you're sweeping the floors and holding 3 jobs, you're hardly working. How much do you think of the American psyche actually believes that the poor people are, well, we can just use Ronald Reagan's, right, the welfare queen, right, the idea that they're sitting back and taking their welfare checks and living off the fat of the hog of other people. How much do you think of that is in the American psyche?
It's totally in the American psyche. And again, you know, you're pointing out again, which I really think is important to understand, is how broad this class warfare is. That is part of the culture that we are taught. Again, referring to Richard Trumka, he refers to part of the problem as the cult of the corporation, which I like that phrase, the cult of the corporation. People do believe that. People have been taught and told that union workers don't work hard. They've been taught and told that it's always the other who doesn't work hard and is therefore messing up your life. It's some of the oldest tactics in the world. And this is not just, you know, happenstance. This is a deliberate campaign. I'm not talking about...
Divide and conquer.
Yeah, divide and conquer. Well, you know, nothing else to
get white workers mad at black workers, get black workers mad at Latino workers.
Or simply, if you want to be kind, they're just protecting their own interest. But their interests are not the same as yours and mine. They are not the same as the general public. Their interest is to feel justified, if nothing else, justified in their incredible wealth. And the only way they can feel really justified with their greed, their wealth, is to make sure that you understand you are inferior.
But here's the thing, Terry. I mean, the wealthiest 1% are still only 1% of America. They supposedly should have only 1% of the voting power.
You would think.
I know you've done a lot of studying of the Tea Party. Now, here you have the Tea Party movement. Let's face it, most of those people are not millionaires.
No.
Most of those people are middle class, maybe some upper middle class, maybe some lower middle class, and they are marching on behalf of harming themselves, of taking away their own income so that the rich have more. Let's show you one more graph on the screen. This shows if everyone had made the same percentage increase, not the same amount increase, but the same percentage increase over the last 30 years, how much they would have made more than the current system. The bottom 20% would have made $5,000 more. The middle America would have made about $10,000 more. It says less because it's what they lost on the current system. And the top 1% made $600,000 more than they otherwise would have made had everyone enjoyed the wealth equally, had everyone been in the train equally. So what you have from the Tea Partiers are people who are saying, I want to give up my money. I want to give up $5,000. I want to give up $10,000. Warren Buffett needs my money. Here, take my child's education, Warren Buffett. Here, Bill Gates. We don't need that second car. You can have it. Here, my wife will work just so that Anna Nicole Smith can make more without having to pay estate taxes. Of course, she's gone, but or someone like her, Paris Hilton, deserves to have more wealth, and for that, we're going to say our kids don't need to go to school. There are people in the Tea Party. There are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, middle-class people, who are marching to the tune of, I need to sacrifice more so that the wealthy get richer.
Somehow,
Now, that's not how they say it.
No, and it's tragic, and I actually do, my heart goes out to them because their anger and their frustration.
And they are angry, and they are frustrated.
It is legitimate, and they are angry because they are hurting economically and have been for about 30 years, in terms of earning power and in terms of wages. They know, they're facing the fact, all of us are facing the fact that if you lose a job today, you are not going to get a job at a comparable wage for the most part. It is continually being pushed down. Their anger and frustration is legitimate, and unfortunately, they have been manipulated, like people by O'Reilly, like Rush Limbaugh. I mean, they truly have been manipulated.
Well, let me tell you what they think, in my mind. Here's what they say. I don't want President Obama in office. I don't want the Democrats in office. They're going to take more of my money and give it to the poor people.
Well, yeah, the other.
They're going to give it to the black people.
The other.
They're going to give it to all those lazy people that do nothing and just get a welfare check. That's how they say it.
Sure.
They don't see themselves as poor. It's interesting. Nobody sees himself as poor. No one sees himself as the bottom 50%.
Well, I'm
Very
not sure.
few.
But,
well, okay. Some homeless guy probably
No, but
does.
I think a lot of minorities see themselves as poor without question.
Fair enough. A lot of white men, people earning $20,000, $30,000 a year, don't realize that their family is close to the poverty line.
It's that Steinbeck thing, and he said it best. I think it was Steinbeck, wasn't it? That said, and I'm going to paraphrase poorly, that America will never become a socialist country because the poor always believe that their poverty is only temporary. And that if they
so it's our optimism that's killing us.
Yeah, it's the American dream, right? With the American dream, you're supposed to be rich. So therefore, if you're not, well, you just have to manipulate things a little bit more in your corner of the world or work a little harder, and by golly, you'll be super rich too.
And, that optimism is part of what I like about America.
Yes.
People with their flat on their back to get up and dust themselves off.
But it's being used against us now, and that's what's so tragic. I mean, people cannot be under the illusion that the super rich really care or feel guilty or feel responsible for how you live.
Warren Buffett does.
Warren Buffett
Bill
is
Gates
the exception.
does. Franklin Roosevelt was very well heeled, as were the Kennedys.
Yeah.
There were.
Yeah.
I mean,
there are exceptions.
What I find interesting is it's not even so much rich individuals, although there are certainly some. So Karl Rove's friends come to mind, or the people like Richard Millen Scaife, who paid I forget how many hundreds of $1 million to take Bill Clinton down. Yeah. But it's the corporations, these entities that Mitt Romney says are people deserving of all the rights of the Constitution, more rights than you.
Yes, more rights. Yeah.
But that they're not even beholden to Americans.
No,
they're beholden to their Chinese and if Gaddafi has money stashed in a corporation, they're beholden. I forgot who it was who said if corporations are people, they're not American people. They don't give a damn about the American people. They can be run by Saudi sheikhs and kings all over the globe.
Let me give you an incredible example I just discovered of that. I was interviewing this wonderful author, Girardet, I forget his first name, Girardet, and his book is Killing the Cranes. It's about Afghanistan, and he was there for 30 years. This is going to shock you, but this shows you what really is going on in terms of the corporations and the power structure. In 1995, notice that's before 2011. I mean 9/11. It's before 9/11. In 1995, the United States government, in cooperation with Unocal, the big oil company, in cooperation with Delta Oil out of Saudi Arabia, in cooperation with Gazprom out of Russia, was negotiating with the Afghanistis, with the Taliban on that pipeline.
An oil pipeline.
Yeah. In 1995, they are in negotiations with the people that we can't negotiate with now for some reason or other. But in 1995, to pursue more wealth, oil, call it, development, call it whatever you want, but totally behind basically the American public's back. The American public, I wouldn't even know about if I hadn't talked to this particular author. You know, and it's astounding.
Actually, there's Ron Suskind who just came out with a book on the Obama's administration that wasn't too kind to Obama.
Yeah.
I remember he wrote The Price of Loyalty about the Bush administration, where he showed an actual exhibit in his book that the CIA accidentally cleared and then regretted it, showing a map of Iraq on January 30th, 2001, before September 11th, 10 days after Bush gets in office by the Supreme Court, and they're dividing up the oil fields. They're saying, all right, this part goes to British Petroleum, this part goes to Exxon, this part goes to Mobil. This was a year and a half before we invaded Iraq. This was 8 months before September 11th, and they're dividing it up, much like you would, I don't know, a game where you divide up the world. Maybe if you ever played Risk, I get Brazil and you get Russia, and you know.
Yeah, but the point is, you know, we should not be under the illusion that corporations or any private entity is really there for the general welfare. That's what you have government for, the general welfare. A corporation's responsibility is not for the general welfare.
No, and unfortunately, it's not even to their shareholders.
No, it's not these days.
No, because the shareholders don't even get a vote on who runs the corporation.
No.
What they do get, people are like, oh, no, they do vote. What they do, if you've ever had a proxy vote, is you can vote yes, that you want the people in charge of the corporation to be there, or you can abstain and say, I don't vote. Those are your two choices. Now, Mubarak or Gaddafi or Stalin all had votes where you could vote yes or no. Now, if you voted no, true, they probably killed you. But at least you could vote no.
At least you could vote.
Corporations are less democratic than the Soviet Union.
They're not democratic.
Or Gaddafi. Of course they're not, because you can't run against them without spending millions and millions of dollars. And they have wonderful things called golden parachutes, where they grab a whole bunch of money from the shareholders and take their little parachute down. And they leave the shareholders.
You mean like Dick Cheney?
That would be one example.
Yeah.
But the point is that they're not even serving the shareholders.
No,
they're serving a very tiny group of people.
And even worse than that, and this is really important.
CEOs and boards of directors.
This is really important to realize in this class warfare. And again, I'm using Richard Trumka's information. The Brookings Institution speech he gave, everybody should find it and listen to it or get the script for it. It's really superb. But the point he was making there is our financial system is entirely separate from our economic system. The financial system that has caused all these problems, that is creating all of this wealth, has no connection with the economy that you and I have to live in.
It used to. There was a time when you would build manufacturing plants and car companies, and if you made money selling cars, Henry Ford gave his workers enough money
so
they could buy his cars. Right. So that mattered. But today,
with globalization and everything, it's totally separate.
You could get a Chinese worker to make your product, which you then sell in Germany, and you get all the profits, and you're an American corporation, and you can avoid taxes as well.
Yeah, but I mean, the finance industry is even beyond that. It's even beyond corporations. Right now, the hedge funds and derivatives are making anywhere from 15 to 30%. Now, you go any market that you and I can get in are not going to get 15
certainly not.
And 30%.
They're only taxed at 15%.
That's right.
They're not taxed at the rate of ordinary income. This is your last chance to call in. Take us down. What do you think? Is there class warfare in the United States? If so, which class is winning? 888-488-MARK. We'll be right back after this.
Saving for retirement might be easy for some folk, but for others, it might take a little more work. And for those who haven't started, there are still things you can do to catch up.
Oh, that is good news.
Like getting out from underneath past debt. And don't get wrapped up with high-interest credit cards.
Get you some eyes.
Be diversified with your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Your financial goals are not out of reach. The choice is clear. For a happy ending, choose to save.
Everyone with alcohol and drug addiction is in the same boat. With treatment, you can find solid ground. For drug and alcohol information and treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP.
Dude, are you sure you want this tattoo? Because just do it.
Some mistakes in life are permanent. Like hearing loss. To learn how to protect your hearing, visit asha.org.
You've probably heard about heart disease, but did you know that it's the #1 killer of women nationwide? Heart disease claims more lives each year than breast cancer, lung cancer, or strokes combined. But there are steps you can take to protect yourself against it. For more information on how you can prevent heart disease,
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. They call it class warfare. At least that's what the Republicans call it, and they mean it in a pejorative term. They say that if the rich have to pay the exact same taxes as the middle class, well, they're just not going to create jobs anymore. They're just going to take their money and run. Interestingly, they're doing that right now. Rich people, and particularly corporations, are sitting on $2 trillion in uninvested cash. That's the largest, by the way, that it's ever been measured since they've done measurements since World War II. $2 trillion. Uninvested, not put into their factories to make things better, just sitting around in bank vaults that they refuse to spend. Why do they refuse to spend it? Well, my view is because there's not enough demand in the economy. If people were out there buying cars and consumers had confidence the economy was going to be good, and they went out and they bought clothing and toys for Christmas, I think there'd be enough demand, and I think then businesses would invest more. Businesses will tell you something else, though. They'll tell you the reason they're not investing is because $2 trillion isn't enough. That even though they have more income, more wealth, more money sitting in banks doing nothing than they've ever had before in American history, both as a function both of total and as a percentage of our gross domestic product. So it's unheard of on both scales. That they want even more. They want $3 trillion, $4 trillion, $6 trillion, $100 trillion. Then a little bit will trickle down. Now, interestingly, George Herbert Walker Bush, the George W. Bush's father, called that voodoo economics. It's also known as trickle-down economics. It's the kind of thing that made Ronald Reagan very famous. Just give a ton of money to rich people, and they'll eat and they'll gobble up, and every now and then a few crumbs will fall on the floor for the rest of us. And Republicans will tell you that if the middle class demands more than the crumbs that fall on the floor, they're practicing class warfare. My guest today is Terry D. Kester. He's a progressive commentator with me on WPFW. 89.3 FM. We are the Raucous Caucus with Garland Nixon every Tuesday at 7 p.m. We'll be on tomorrow. I hope you'll listen in. Terry, how does that argument win over middle class Tea Party people?
How does it win over? Their argument, you mean?
Yeah. Why are they supporting?
It's called fear. You know, I mean, I can't remember the exact quote. Julius Caesar was the one who said it. You know, all he needed to do was to manipulate the people to get them into war or anything else was create fear. That's all you need to do. And that's what they do. They create fear. They also create a genuine sense of inadequacy in individuals, not just through marketing, but through this whole attitude, this whole American attitude. You know, and this is created.
Fear that the poor people are stealing from you rather than the rich people.
The poor people are stealing, and you know, the reason you're not rich and this guy is because you are inadequate. You know, you haven't done enough, or your teachers were no good, or you know, your parents were no good. I mean, they just stack this cultural damnation on the American people.
And you know, it's interesting. Taxes under President Obama are lower for everybody, rich, middle class, poor, than you've ever been in American history. They're 15% of GDP. They have not been this low since the 1920s that we've seen taxes that low. And yet, when we had this massive deficit, caused almost entirely by these very, very low rates on the rich, people are complaining, saying, nope, taxes are too high. And my question is it just that they just think their taxes are going to poor people and they're willing to let them go to rich but not to the poor?
You use that operative word there, which is think. And I mean, I'm not trying to be elitist here. I mean, you know, if you have a war of any kind, I don't care if it's Hitler way back, not that far back, Hitler, whatever, the first thing you start with your war is propaganda. You don't start shooting first. You start the propaganda. The propaganda has been going on for decades. And
that unions are bad,
that unions
welfare
are bad,
queens,
you know, that blacks don't work as hard as, and Latinos don't work hard, and whomever the other happens to be. But this constant propaganda that it's your fault. It's only your fault and my fault that we're in the economic position that we're in.
And yet they defend inherited wealth, where people who haven't earned anything get to have all this money. They defend the fact that investments are cheaper than hard work, that if you work by the sweat of your brow, digging ditches, you got to pay twice the rate of someone who sits and monitors
asking these people,
interest rates.
You're asking the people to think, and I'm not saying that they can't think. I'm not saying that at all.
You're just saying they're very manipulable.
These are emotional issues that the propaganda is hitting upon. These are emotional issues, and people respond emotionally. They can think.
Yeah, let me show you an emotional pitch. This is actually one that was on a show I was on. Let me just give you an example of an emotional pitch. Let's hope that comes up. Sometimes these things don't work as well as you want them to.
President Obama focusing in on wealthy Americans to fund his big government agenda.
It's a concept of fairness.
We'll take a look at some of the unintended consequences of his Soak the Rich tax plan.
Caution, you are about to enter
the Soak the Rich tax plan. Those poor rich people. The guy's on the golf course. You can tell he's working hard trying to make that putt. And Obama is trying to take his golf clubs away from him. Now, I think he probably could afford enough to have golf clubs, but
I think so.
But that's fear.
Well, there was even, I don't know if you watch football, but I was amazed the other day during one of the football games. I think it was a Redskin game, as a matter of fact. There was this ad on, condemning Obama and condemning the health care plan and condemning his jobs plan and everything else. And just with these blatant accusations, no information whatsoever, he's destroying jobs. Yeah. He's going to destroy America. Your feet are going to rot.
I saw one recently paid for by healthcare companies that says that the healthcare proposal, the healthcare bill law that passed, is a job killer and is going to cost all this money. Actually, all it does, because it doesn't change the healthcare system much, all it does is make it easier for people to afford healthcare. That's all it does. Yeah. It doesn't do that much. If you can't afford healthcare, it allows you to afford healthcare. If you're a small business, you can't afford to give your employees healthcare, gives you credit to give your employees healthcare. If you're 26 you can be on your parents' plan. If you have a pre-existing condition, you can afford. All it does is make it easier for people to buy healthcare. And, oh no, it's terrible to make healthcare costs go down. We can't have healthcare costs go down because, well, we're the healthcare companies and that would hurt our profits. But they don't quite say it like that. And yet there are people that say, all right, that's just part of capitalism, Terry. We live in a capitalist country.
You don't have capitalism.
It's perfectly fine for companies to try to trick people into giving them more money.
No, this is something else we've got to understand. We don't live in capitalist society anymore. We lived in a managed capitalist society.
Crony capitalism.
No, not crony capitalism, but managed capitalism. It's a specific term. I can't remember the economist.
What does it mean?
It simply means that what you're doing is you're manipulating money as opposed to creating products or anything else.
And like that's the credit default swaps that brought us into this recession.
And that's what's been happening in this country for the last 20 years or so, is you have managed capitalism. Every time there's been a major economic crisis in the world, it's been preceded by essentially managed capitalism, where you're simply moving the money around. Is all you're doing, making a very quick profit on it, has nothing to do with products, has nothing to do with jobs, has everything to do with accumulating great wealth.
Now, I can't recall that happening in America since the 1920s.
Yeah, well,
and we all know that the 1920s was a roaring decade,
yeah, you better believe it.
And there was nothing bad that happened afterwards except the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Here's the thing I find interesting. If you look at the wealth rates, same as the 1920s. You look at the tax rates. Same as the 1920s. You look at Republican economic policy, it's exactly the same as Herbert Hoover's. Yes. The idea that when you're in an economic recession, you need to contract the economy by cutting government spending and by increasing taxes on the poor and middle class, which is what the Republicans want to do. They want to increase the payroll taxes, which affect middle class people, while lowering taxes on the rich, and they want to cut government spending. They want to cut health care spending. They want to cut Social Security spending. They want to take what little they can from middle class and poor people and give it to the rich.
And that makes perfect sense in their world, because what they are doing is protecting their wealth. They do realize
except for those Tea Party people, those fellow
but
travelers.
I'm talking about the rich here.
What Lenin called the what did he call them? The convenient idiots, something like that. The idea that, but see, here's the thing. In the 1920s, and even going back to the 1890s, really that whole 30-year period, It's interesting. It's called the Progressive Era. And the reason it's called the Progressive Era is things got so bad, and there were so many panics, and there was so little wealth to 99% of Americans. In fact, during the panic of 1896, the government didn't have any money. There was no Federal Reserve then, and they had to ask Andrew Carnegie and J.P. Morgan and John Rockefeller to give the government some money because we'd run out of money, and there are about 6 industrialists that had about half the nation's wealth. It's called the Progressive Era because in the 1890s, beginning with books like Upton Sinclair, people started to revolt. There were labor movements. There were Pullman strikes. There was violence in the streets. People were fighting, angry. Police were called out, and we were on the brink of some kind of warfare. Frankly, it happened in Germany and England, too, which is why it led to the rise of Adolf Hitler.
It's happening now. It's happening now.
That's my next question for you. With the Wall Street protests, are we going to see the people fight back and say, you know what? I'm sick of this. I'm sick of Wall Streeters taking all our money. You know, if I can't get a fair wage at a fair job, I'm going to have to fight back and get it that way.
The only hopeful thing, well, not maybe the only hopeful, but one of the hopeful things, you really can only push people so far. And the people around the world are being pushed, and they know it. And they're scared, and they're frightened. But I am very encouraged by these minor, soft protests.
The Wall Street protests.
The Wall Street protests. This is what has to happen. I would wish that wouldn't have to happen. But the fact is, until the super wealthy and the super powerful are threatened, and I do mean threatened, you will not see change.
Now, the only way to threaten them...
You check all of history, that is the only thing that's ever...
The only way to threaten them, according to the Constitution, is to elect people in the government, but the Supreme Court has said, interestingly, that instead of one person, one vote, it's basically $1, one vote. That a corporation can spend $10 billion, could be a Chinese corporation, doesn't matter. They have more power over our elections than you and me.
Of course they do. There's a 2006 memo from Citigroup that everybody should read. 2006 and 2007, 2 memos put out to the richest clients they had. And it basically told them this whole economic crisis, you can read it, you can look it up online and read it. It went out and basically told the richest clients, we're going to have this economic problem. It's coming, okay? But don't you worry, you're safe, you're cool, your investments are safe, everything is fine. And it literally says, I forget if it's in the 2006 or 2007, but it literally says the only threat to your possible security is if there is some kind of uprising. That is the fact. It may not be the way we want life to progress. It may not be the way we think democracy, or what's left of our democracy, should progress. But it is the way of life.
I remember the Lenin phrase now. It was useful idiots was the name of the phrase. And I would say, I'm sorry, Tea Party people, you folks are useful idiots.
They're being used
by very rich people to take money from you and give it to them. Now, I'm not demonizing rich people. There's some very good rich people. I've mentioned them, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, people who understand that America is for the people, by the people, of the people, all the people, not just those that are wealthy. And if you believe that, or if you don't believe it, I ask you to leave a comment on my website. Just go to marklevine.tv, marklevine.tv. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. I want to thank Jerry DeKester for a wonderful show. The class warfare continues, and the 2012 election will largely determine who wins. This is Mark Levine. Hope you enjoyed the show. See you next week.